Good afternoon. Today's reading comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 21, verses 8 to 21. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, put it in on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast a child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a way off, about the distance of a bowshot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of my child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boys. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him in the land of Egypt. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Today's biblical narrative encourages us to reflect in our relationships with our neighbors, especially with our neighbors who are victims of all kinds of violence and dehumanization in their daily lives. We are keenly aware of this reality happening in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our countries. The media reminds us of the huge crisis of human relationships happening among us now, right now, here. Times and names have changed, but the biblical story have direct relevance for us now. Today's story from the 21st chapter in the book of Genesis is a narrative that portrays a story involving the exercise of power others and cultural patterns of oppression. These two hurtful and destructive exercises of power bound together, involving gender, status, discrimination, inheritance of land, and dehumanization of peoples. The longing for power and the maintenance of it leads many to oppress people. Hagar was oppressed in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, class, slave status, immigrant status, and as a victim survivor of rape. She additionally endured the struggle of single motherhood and a struggle for survival for her and her son. It is an act of violence and cruelty that Sarah and Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael out in the wilderness to die. It is through systematic violence that they held Hagar as their slave, through an institution so violent that her life was perceived as a disposable possession. Abraham and Sarah viewed Hagar as someone whose body could be used and abused. Abraham and Sarah used Hagar, their Egyptian slave, to bear a child for them. It was a common custom in Mesopotamia. We also know that Hagar's status is merely that both of a foreigner and a slave woman in a Hebrew's household. Her struggle was a struggle of survival, involving constant compromising and adjustment, constantly treated as an alien with a different culture in different traditions, who was looked down upon, mocked, despised in her master's house. Hagar was also the victim of the legal practices in ancient Middle Eastern law. The masters imposed themselves into the life of the slaves, believing that people who are slaves only deserve to inherit extreme poverty. The domination of persons and their elimination are branches of the same tree. Biblical scholar Phyllis Tribal notes in Hagar, Sarah, and their children that Sarah and Hagar's conflict remains unresolved. She states, "This troubling and humbling situation involves ethnicity, class, gender, progeny, and the struggle for inheritance and land. The struggle continues today. The patterns in Sarah's and Hagar's are replicated in many struggles today, which also includes violence among Sarah's and Hagar's descendants." Dear friends, the holy and living God is different. The ways of God are just and life-giving. God hears and speaks. Without the word and the action of God, that will have been the end of the story. But God hears. God listens. In this case, God hears through the voice of the mother, Hagar, the silence and hidden death of the child. People whose voices are silent have a voice for this holy God. The words of God and action are complementary. This action is very concrete and specific. God knows people by name. God cares for the cries of the people. The God who hears appears in the smallest details. In so specific manner, disturbs history by leading transformation that brings an end to the domination of slave children and women. The insistence on God's hearing becomes an allusion to the name of Hagar's child. In today's narrative, nowhere mentions the name of the child. Nonetheless, the name resounds to the phrase, God hears, since Ishmael means precisely that, God hears. God hears. This story calls us to hear, to listen with compassion and attention, to speak with care and humble intention, and to act attending for the well-being of all peoples and all creation. In a time of human crisis, as crisis as this today, we must attune our ears to hear, to listen the cries of the oppressed, to those afflicted by injustices, whether they inhabit in our immediate circles, a friend suffering, a family suffering depression, a peer struggling with trauma, or whether they inhabit in our greater society, the racial marginalization, the poor and the homeless, the refugee, the widow. May God's grace make us pursuers of justice as we listen the cries of the people. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.